So welcome everyone. For those of you that I haven't met yet, I'm Sophie Block. I'm the director of Hillels of Memphis, and I'm so excited to be putting together this program. It's a lecture series that you'll hear a little bit more about from our official introduction in a second. But just thank you for joining us. I think I am a lifelong learner, and so many of us in this community are lifelong learners, so I'm really excited to celebrate the spirit of learning together today. And with that, I'd like to introduce the chair of the Hillels of Memphis, or the U of M, University of Memphis Hillel Advisory Council, Hal Fogelman.
Thank you, Sophie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people turned out for today's program. On One Foot, that Sophie mentioned, is a virtual learning series that features a different Jewish faculty member from the University of Memphis or Rhodes College every other week to spotlight the incredible Jewish intellectual talent we have here in Memphis for the benefit of the entire Memphis Jewish community to enjoy and learn. And I do want to thank Sophie again. This is just a wonderful turnout today, and Sophie is managing through these times and providing students at both University of Memphis and Rhodes with some wonderful opportunities that would be impressive in normal times and even more so now. So thank you, Sophie. Each guest speaker in the series is encouraged to discuss what his or her academic area of expertise is so that they can teach us about navigating life's challenges today, as well as share about their own Jewish journey. This week's lecturer is Professor Cynthia Bernstein. After 10 years at Auburn University, Professor Bernstein joined the University of Memphis to teach linguistics in the Master of Arts and PhD programs. Her research and teaching areas include the study of dialect variation, methods of gathering and interpreting linguistic data, and the use of linguistic tools to analyze literary and popular genres. Although born and raised in New York, she is particularly interested in language varieties of the Southern United States. Welcome and thank you, Professor Bernstein.
Thank you so much to Sophie Block and to the Hillels of Memphis for organizing this, and to that wonderful introduction from Hal Fogelman. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to try sharing this, my screen with you so you can see. Can you see that all right now? Okay, good. So we're going to talk about what Jewish English is and some definitions. Not everybody agrees on the definition of Jewish English, but we'll get some ideas about that. We'll talk a little bit about who speaks it or who uses it. It doesn't always is spoken. It's sometimes in other forms. And why we might use it, or some people might use it, and under what circumstances. And what I'm hoping to do here is to talk for a little while and then to pause to allow you to ask questions, participate, give examples. I'll have some particular questions along the way, or you can save them to the end. And I definitely appreciate your input. You're not only my audience, and I thank you for attending, but you're also my consultants on language use. And that's the nice thing about being in the field of linguistics. I'm not the expert. The people who use the language are the experts in the language. So we'll be talking about that. So we'll talk about what Jewish English is, and it's generally considered a variety of English influenced primarily by Yiddish and Hebrew and spoken by Jews of Eastern European origin. But that's really an oversimplified view of it. We'll talk more about how else it might be defined or used. It's not the only Jewish variety of language. And as I've studied Jewish languages in general, I came to realize that Jewish English is only one variation of language used in the home country. There's Judeo-Italian, Judeo-Spanish, Judeo-French, and so on, Judeo-Greek. In addition to the other languages used primarily by Jews, such as Hebrew and Yiddish. Ladino is another name for Jewish Spanish, and it, like Yiddish, is used across many countries, starting from the Inquisition time when Jews were expelled from Spain and went to Turkey and so on, and started bringing with them Judeo-Spanish or Ladino. There's a wonderful website that I would recommend to you called jewishlanguages.org, and it was created by Sarah Bunin-Benor, and she is a wonderful researcher. If you Google her name, you'll find a lot of YouTube videos you can listen to about this topic of Jewish languages, and I'll be referring to some of her work as we go along. In particular, Jewish vocabulary is part of that Jewish languages website. JEL stands for Jewish English Lexicon, or list of words, and you can look up any word that you might be interested in that resource. And when we're talking about Jewish English, we're primarily going to talk about vocabulary or lexicon, but it's also a matter of pronunciation, discourse style, how you speak, and to whom you speak, and other features, including, for example, the font I used in this talk. What is Jewish English? There's nothing non-English about it except the appearance of it that reminds you perhaps a little bit of Hebrew. And in fact, Hebrew is used in many ways to represent affiliations. Perhaps you have a Hillel t-shirt that has Hillel written in Hebrew from your university. I found that you could buy a Yankees baseball cap with Yankees written in Hebrew letters, but it's an English word. It's not Hebrew, it's just Hebrew lettering. But it carries such significance. It carries multiple affiliations that you have. You're not only identifying yourself as Jewish, but also, say, as a Yankees fan. And so if you see these two kind of merge together, it has, language is always multiple causes in the use of and how we use language. It isn't just one thing, but the cultural identity of being Jewish certainly is a strong factor in language use. And the second one is the University of Minnesota, with Minnesota spelled out in Hebrew letters. Now, in today's political world, we have buttons that you can buy that identify yourself both as Jewish and supporting one or another presidential candidate. So the first example is a Trump button with Trump written in Hebrew letters, the year given as 2020. The other says phonetically, dump Trump, so on both sides of that issue. And then there's a Trump-Pence yarmulke that you can buy online, and underneath in small letters it says keep America great, but only using Hebrew letters, not using any Hebrew language other than the letters. And then finally, the last example is kind of interesting for a number of reasons. It's Jews for Biden and Harris 2020 with the abbreviations only Hebrew part. And the top one says, it's Aramaic, Bisyata Deshmaya. It's used, an expression used primarily by Orthodox Jews. That means with the help of heaven. But you may be more familiar with Baruch Hashem, which is often added to letters and any communication in its abbreviated form. But what are the letters in Baruch Hashem? The bet and the hey also sound like Biden and Harris. So it's an interesting combination, I think, of identifiers in that particular button. We'll start by using some examples of the Jewish English lexicon, and an example that came up again very recently is mamala. Now, have you heard that at all, mamala? Anybody has heard it?
Yes.
It's because Kamala Harris has a Jewish husband named Doug Emhoff, and his two children by a previous marriage, Cole and Ella. And they decided that stepmom was too formal a word to refer to their mother, and so they adopted mamala, and it's a kind of, one source said that it was chosen because it told them how to pronounce Kamala, and it's a good reminder of how to pronounce her name. But there's a website where you can go at Parents Magazine that tells you about 5 good things in the use of the word mamala to represent that relationship. And we can talk about that more a little later, but to me it just sounds so warm and fuzzy in terms of expressing their relationship. So I found this picture representing Mamala. Now in the Yiddish is not often spelled as they do with Kamala's name reference. It's usually produced with an M-A-M-E-L-E or perhaps with an H at the end of it. There are lots of variations, and there's some Hebrew lettering for Mamala. So what is Mamala? I went to the Jewish English Lexicon website that I mentioned earlier, and what's nice about it is that it shows alternative spellings, usage and other forms and sample sentences and origin of language and so on. And here, though, they didn't list any alternative spellings, and that might be updated. You'll notice on the website there's an opportunity to edit this web page, and by editing it, you could, if I feel like it, I could add, well, wait a minute, I've come across these other spellings of it, and they'll check that out and decide whether to change the website. Its definition is interesting because it's often used to refer to a little girl, you know, a cute little girl. You know, it's not just one's mother, but, you know, oh, you sweetheart, you're such a little mamala. And it's really a future mom. And according to this website, who uses this is by older religious Jews. And, but I think we'll find that with the popularity of the term on the internet, it may be used more generally than that. So language is changing and usage is changing as we go along. So where does Mamala come from? And this teaches us a little bit how the language is structured and how we can build words from English or use Yiddish words that are built on a kind of way of speaking. So according to The Yiddish Teacher by Hyman E. Golden, and this is a source that goes back to the 1930s, and I happen to know it because Hyman E. Golden was my grandfather. He was a rabbi who wrote not only religious books and translations, but he wrote a book about teaching Yiddish, and less well known, a book about slang in prisons, because he was also a prison chaplain. So he had an interesting background, and from that book, we learn that the Allah ending actually consists of two parts. One meaning small, the EL part. So a kind is a child and a kindle is a little child, and kindle is a cute little child. So it's really two extra endings that we have on the Allah thing. And so we can have hentel and hentela as another example. And I remember this baby game called Pachi Kichala that you'd play with a tiny child. It's really Yiddish for patty cakes. And there's another morpheme or another ending on it. The ending makes it plural. So cute little cakes or little hands that they're referring to in that children's rhyme. In my own background, my grandmother, I remember, made an English word out of this. She would often call her grandchildren doll or dolly. Dolly would be the English equivalent of little in some words, like puppy and kitty. But she would call me Dolly, or sometimes Dalala, her cute little Dalala. And I love that. And perhaps you have some examples of how you use that or when you might use that. Now I'm getting a little more into the political theme, and this came up 4 years ago when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, and she was referred to by Donald Trump as having got schlonged. Now, schlong, some of you may be cringing right now because it's considered an obscene word by some speakers. Schlong, in general, without the ED, means penis in Yiddish. And so you can imagine for Donald Trump to be using this, is he being obscene? Maybe. But Steven Pinker, who is a Canadian-American Jewish linguist, made the comment that, well, many goyim are confused by the large number of Yiddish terms beginning with shla or shma. And, you know, you can think of some of your own, but he gave the examples of shlemiel, shlemazel, shmagegi, shlub, shlach, and so on. And he thinks that goyim, non-Jews, may use them incorrectly or interchangeably, and that he perhaps used what he thought was a Yinglish word or Yiddish English word to mean beat, or and maybe he inadvertently coined an obscene one, maybe not. So I got curious, how is schlonged used, and what's the best way of exploring it? And as Hal Fogelman mentioned, I'm very curious about ways of researching linguistics and coming up with large-scale sources for investigating it. And nowadays, what better resource is there than Twitter? So you can go on Twitter and check out schlonged and how people use it. And when I went there, I found that everybody was referring to this scandalous use of schlonged by Donald Trump. So I thought, well, how was it used a few years ago? And the neat thing about Twitter is if you go to advanced search, you can find out searches of any time period since the internet came along. And this is a screenshot of what I got when I looked up schlonged in 2013. So before Trump's use of the word, and I looked up only schlonged because, well, I looked up schlonged too, but schlonged was more interesting. And probably this is how Trump may have meant it. In the words of the great Bob, I don't know who he's referring to there, but the Panthers are getting schlonged. They're getting beaten badly. And that doesn't sound so obscene, but if you look at the others, such as next white girl, grab my butt, is getting long schlonged. Now, that would be another example of a less polite use of it by probably a non-white speaker of English. So the usage of the term seems widespread, and at the same time, it's mostly used in this highly negative way. But you may have different experiences with it. I interviewed my granddaughter and my son and various other people, some of whom have joined us. So thank you for your input on the use of that term. So other linguistic databases that I've used to find out about language usage, and you can too, looking up Yiddish words, you can go to places like Facebook or Twitter and find out in general who's using them. You can of course use Google and other search engines. I've used Craigslist more for my research in Southern English than in Jewish English, because on Craigslist, that's a place that sells things, right? And you can sell things in any part of the country. So I was teaching a class on Southern English, and I came up with an example of another way of saying chest of drawers in the South is Chester drawers. Chester drawers, like the name Chester, followed by drawers. Now, my students didn't believe me that existed. So I said, well, let's see if anybody is selling a Chester drawers. And sure enough, they were sold in the South much more often than in the North. And I compared it to some non-dialectic word, such as chest of drawers or bureau. And so we compared its usage to some other words that might, and we got some interesting results, but that gets a little bit off topic, but Craigslist is a wonderful resource for checking out language. Another resource that is available through the University of Memphis to do research is LexisNexis. And LexisNexis involves legal and resources and news resources. And so you can check out the use of words in various newspapers. And I've used that to check out some Jewish English resources. And this is from some years ago, but I did a paper that compared general papers, which I in Denver, Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, to Southeastern papers from Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, Charleston, and New Orleans, just to see how the use of compared. And again, I couldn't just look up number of words, because depending on the size of the paper and its distribution, you might get numbers that were influenced by that. So I came up with a ratio to another word that might have been used instead. For example, glitch, which is probably a Yiddish word, but is so generally used now that people tend not to think of it as Yiddish, and maven, which is likewise fairly general. And I compared them to non-Yiddish words of flaw and whiz in this table. And the Jewish English example constituted 24% of general papers and more of Southern English papers. So glitch wasn't used more in the North, as I thought it would be, than in the South. It was used about the same or even more in the South. And the same with maven. But if you compare something like schlep or tchotchke, look at tchotchke. Tchotchke was used as opposed to knick-knack 28% of the time in Northeastern, in general papers rather, but in the Southern papers, it's only used 9% of the time. That asterisk means that that's a significant difference, as you can see. So tchotchke is if I were to test this today, the last research on this was some years ago. If I were to test it today, I might guess that tchotchke is used more now, and even in Southern papers, than it used to be. And I would guess that because I heard it used on Home and Garden television the other day as how many tchotchkes were around. It had nothing to do with being Jewish. It were just knickknacks in the house. So, so those are some of the things you could find out by using these resources. I was looking at some changes over time. I just compared the New York paper to an Atlanta paper and saw that in the difference between glitch to flaw in Atlanta versus New York, there was an increase only slightly in the Southern papers, but the Southern papers really caught on to maven in that time difference. And so the nice thing is, and the point here is that you can check usage over time as well as region. And those are things that affect our language. You'll notice that some words are associated with older Jewish people versus younger Jewish people. So change over time is an indirect way of measuring age differences in the way people speak.
You're right.
So I just thought we might pause for a minute and see, I don't know, Sophie, are you moderating this to see if there are people who might have something to contribute about your own favorite Yiddish word, your own favorite example of a lexicon, or something that I haven't mentioned here, or a question you might have about it?
Sure, yeah, if someone wants to speak, you can just unmute yourselves and we'll try not to cross over each other. Or you can raise your hand and I can call on you.
Just raise your hand.
Any comments?
Raise your hand.
I can go on a little bit, and you can save them for the end if you're thinking of it too, because there's, as I say, there are a lot more examples, and it's a lot of fun. I just, if you were just kind of just holding on to something you wanted to share, I loved, as I say, you're my informants, you're my consultants, so please, it's really doing me a favor and everybody. And I see Harry Samuels, my friend there, so.
The word Sibylla, which, as you know, means onions, is my favorite. And the old Yiddish curse, "Sollst du wachsen wie a Sibylle mit the cup and dreher." You should grow like an onion with your head in the ground.
I love that. I love that example. Actually, maybe some of you can think about the answer to this question. I was trying to think of this the other day. My grandmother used to make a pastry that was a yeasty pastry, but with raisins and cinnamon, and it was folded over like a turnover. I was trying to figure out what she called it, and I thought she called it plätzlach, but plätzlach have onions in it, at least in my research. So if anyone has the answer to that wonderful Jewish pastry that's yeasty and like a donut without a hole and has raisins on the inside, or maybe other goodies, let me know.
Now that you mentioned plätzlach, I recall that is the word she used.
That sounds like, I can't see everybody's face, but that sounds like my brother Jerry. Thank you for coming. And I knew
your
you'd
brother
be able.
Jerry.
Thank you, because I really think she used that. So there may be a way of making the pletzlach dough and putting something else on the inside that made it, and I have not come across that recipe, so I'm going to try to recreate it, I think, for Thanksgiving, and see if I can make my grandma's pletzlach, what she called pletzlach. So that, again, is a great example of variation in usage. Was it just used that way in my family? Did other families use it that way? So far, I haven't been able to find other families that have pletzlach with raisins in it. So maybe that was just, but thank you, Jerry, because I was really wondering.
Cynthia, my name's Barry Lichterman.
Yes,
and
hi.
I have to give you two of them because they just became so important to me. Zadie and Bubby. And I just became a grandfather about 3 weeks ago. And I tell people I'm a Zadie. And even the Jewish people don't know what I'm talking about.
They don't know it anymore. Is that, in fact, that's one of the questions I had for you, especially with this mamala topic coming up.
And my mother used to call my sister Mamala. You know, she was and she's a Bubby now. Her grandkids call her Bubby.
So my own grandparents, I didn't call Bubby and Zadie. I distinguished the two sides of the family with Grandma Golden and Grandma Maisel. But my cousins, the ones who were raised in a more Orthodox setting and a more Yiddish using setting, definitely did call them Bubby and Zadie, and even some of the less religious, but maybe it's just tradition. It may not be how religious you are or what denomination you are, but just, but I do remember calling some of my Yiddish speaking aunts, Tanta Sorrel, Tanta Paya. And so, and you notice I started getting the accent, Tanta Sorrel, Tanta Paya, and it becomes part of the way of speaking as well. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about how your families use Bubby, Zadie. And interesting enough, I found that there was one survey that said that very few Yiddish English speaking people. Now Yiddish speaking is different, but you know, like in communities, some people call them black hat communities where Yiddish is the first language. They don't usually use the Yiddish words for mommy and daddy. They usually use Ima and Abba, the Hebrew words. So, and that's, again, that's an interesting example. And it doesn't, you know, it just says interesting things about usage, which is one of the things that, you know, I'm very interested in. Well, we'll continue on a bit, and again, if you have some examples, there'll definitely be more time for that. But we're turning to the question of who's speaking it now. Who's speaking Yinglish, Yiddish English, Jewish English? These are different names for the same thing. Some people, religious language is sometimes referred to as from speak, and there are other names for it too. Hebonics. Sarah Benner, who I mentioned earlier, wrote a paper. It was published in Language Magazine, but it was called Mensch, Bench, and Balagan. And there's a YouTube by that title as well, Language as it affects Jewish identity. And she gave examples of some of the factors that influence the use of language, including age, how much you attend synagogue, what denomination, and by that is Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative, and other denominations, and also how attached you are to Israel, and whether you've spent time in Israel might affect how you speak. And the terms themselves, mensch, I think is familiar to most people as literally means a man, but it means a good person in general. I've heard Joe Biden referred to as a mensch, by the way, as as an example. Bench, which Benner points out has changed in meaning somewhat over time, whereas bench or benchen, you notice we dropped the Yiddish and infinitive ending and just say bench, and use it in sometimes to pray in general, And sometimes it is referred to saying the grace after meals. So have we benched yet? You know, have you said grace after meals? But you might also bench Licht, like the Sabbath, or holiday candles, and other examples. Ben-Or also has been investigating the usage of Hebrew and Yiddish and other Jewish languages at summer camps. And these are not all highly religious, and they're not all Orthodox, but they do use Hebrew, more or less Hebrew, depending on the camp. She was doing research on that. Yiddish, Ladino, there's a Ladino camp. There's a camp where Russian is spoken, and some Yiddish words are from the Russian language as well. And the third term, balagan, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I was not. And so I looked up the use of these words in the Jewish English lexicon source. Mensch is listed as being used by Jews and non-Jews, and words that have spread outside Jewish networks completely. Here are also some of the dictionaries that you can find this in, and they're, again, it's a wonderful resource. Bench is used primarily by religious Jews in North America. We're not, you know, and this is a primary area of use that may be used elsewhere. And when we do balagan, it's written used by religious Jews, but also diaspora Jews who feel connected to Israel and have spent some time there. And it means a disorderly or confusing or overwhelming situation, as the mall on Black Friday was a balagan. I've seen it translated as circus, kind of, yeah, how we might use circus. And I've also saw that it was related to the English word balcony. So anyway, there you go, balagan, a new word for me, and a very interesting one too. So I got to thinking about words, though, that are used in general English. And so what are, if we're not talking about primarily religious uses, and one of them is, again, related to schlang, is schmuck, which I thought it might be related to the German meaning of that, which is jewel, by the way. But in Yiddish, it's not. I don't even think the origin is the same. It's another word for penis. But it's used, and Jews, again, will often cringe at this as being totally inappropriate. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone, but it's not my intent. But it's also used by the general public in a much milder way. And there's a linguistic process called amelioration. And it means a word that used to be bad, and it's now considered, you know, just an ordinary word. And it's often used in a much more ordinary way, although it's not a good word, it's still used, and it often means somebody that you might refer to as a prick, or, you know, it's just some bad person in general. And you can use it as a verb. You can, again, use it more generally. My son pointed out it is used in the movie Ishtar from the 1980s with Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty. You can look that up and find a YouTube site where you can hear the exchange between them, where Dustin Hoffman is trying to teach Warren Beatty how to pronounce the word. They're characters in the movie, and Beatty keeps saying smuck, and Dustin Hoffman goes into great detail. So I think even back then it wasn't considered quite as offensive as it is in general by Jews today, but I'd have to do current survey research to find out. Again, you're my experts, and you might have some opinion as to how it's used and how inappropriate its usage is. So I was looking, you know, as I've been spending time now at on the computer, and I got a subscription to Netflix that I didn't have before, with, you know, being home more. So I was listening to the binging, as you might say, on the American version of House of Cards, a Netflix series. It's very much like today's political situation in some ways. But I was surprised to hear the word schmooze in it. There's nothing about, you know, in one episode, it was used, you know, just as though it's an ordinary word. But Benor pointed out in one of her talks that schmooze as a verb meaning to chat or to gossip or to sort of in a friendly way to get along with people is used more in another meaning by non-Jews today, meaning to network. And it's used with a direct object that you might schmooze your boss or schmooze him up. And it's more like brown nose in that sense. So its meaning can change as well as it moves from Yinglish to general American speech, or it isn't always just in America. There's some words I've heard in other countries, English-speaking videos. One expression like this was fancy schmancy, and it was used in a series, again, I watched on Netflix called Offspring, which is an Australian based series. And the only thing it was doing there is I walked into this hotel and called it fancy schmancy. Well, what does it mean when something's not just fancy? Boy, this is fancy, but it's fancy schmancy. In my way, it's thinking it kind of puts it down a little bit. It's not, you know, it's not my world. It's not something I care about. It's something I'm putting down. And I know that there are two book titles that use it. And it's, again, it's a Jewish English word formation process. It isn't just a word. It's, you can do anything with it. So Fran Drescher, when she was overcoming cancer, wrote a book called Cancer Schmancer. And a friend, Marty Bergen, who's a bridge player, wrote a book called Points Schmoints. And it means that, you know, points aren't as important as we think they are in evaluating your hand at bridge. So it's a way of putting things down. And again, you may have examples of this, or think of how productive it is as a process, not just as a word. Another thing I heard recently was Chris Cuomo calling Trump a no-goodnik, coming from the Russian to Yiddish. And so the nick suffix in Yiddish is productive, and you can call any person, you know, a no-goodnik, and people will know what you mean by that. So it's another suffix or morpheme we can add that's Yiddish. And so Yiddish isn't just words. So another word is kibitz. Kibitzin is to be able to watch somebody perhaps and offer unwelcome advice. Again, this comes to me in the bridge world. Everybody who watches bridge and isn't playing is a kibitzer. But in bridge, you know, do you have to be inputting some unwelcome advice while you're kibitzing? In bridge, you're allowed to kibitz in some contexts, but not say anything. So we still call it kibitzing if you do it then. But I love this example from a very recent column to Dear Abby. The man is complaining that his wife is offering too much unwelcome advice to him in everything he does, whether it's in the kitchen or the way he dresses. And the only thing I seem to be able to do is to go to the restroom without her supervision, but I lock the door just in case she decides to kibitz. Now, I have no idea whether this was written by a Jewish author, but it was definitely published in a national column. So I don't think it would have been published if they didn't have the sense that that would be widely understood. And I think probably that's a word people may not even recognize as coming from Yiddish at all. So now another question I have, and relating to who uses it, if you want to chime in at this point, do you know any people who speak English? Do you have relatives? Do you use it? Do you have friends who use it in certain contexts? Do you, I know some friends of mine out there have pointed out to me, I don't know if Karen is there and is willing to talk about it, but she's a friend from the Upper West Side in New York. I've known her since kindergarten, and she's not Jewish, but she hears a lot of Yiddish in New York. And just because it's, and she knew all these words that she told me, so I hope she'll share some of the words. I remember she said she's, oy vey was one of them that, you know, that everybody says oy vey. by the way, schlep, which wasn't used that much in the South, but maybe used more. There's a moving van company in New York called Schleppers. And it's, you know, and I saw it on the street. I took a picture of it. It was wonderful. But then again, there's a restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee called Notchville. So, you know, it's not just New Yorkers who know it. Again, and if you've been holding up with some questions or comments, I'd love to hear some more. I think Harry's raising his hand. Sophie, can you I know I can, but you're much more adept at it. Can you let
Harry, I'll ask you to unmute.
Harry, you need to unmute yourself.
Wife handles
There you
this.
go.
Thank you.
Am I okay?
Yes.
I found it very interesting. We've been to Israel 11 times.
Wow.
And I've always, at first I thought, well, golly, I'll be able to speak Yiddish to people in Israel. That's not the case.
No.
And I was told the reason for that is that when they first came from Europe, they wanted to become part of the Israeli milieu to such an extent that they forced themselves to speak Hebrew rather than Yiddish. But several years ago, I went with a group of 135 Federation leaders to Uzbekistan. And one of the things we did was take some food on behalf of the Federation to some of these people who had been transported from Russia at the beginning of World War II. They've lived there 70 years. Well, they lived in Russia, it was 70 years. They weren't allowed to have any connection with religion at all. But we walked up on the third floor. They all seemed to be on the third or fourth floor with no elevator. And we took this package. We had a guide, and we walked up, and this lady opened the door, and for some reason I said, Shalom Aleichem. She got so excited, she got rid of the guide, and she and I spoke Yiddish. She remembered it from her time in Belarus. And it was an area where my mother was from. And so our accents were very similar. But I found that very interesting. I went all the way to Uzbekistan to find somebody that spoke Yiddish.
Well, I love your example, and I think I mentioned this later, but it's in the process of speaking that Yiddish was dying out for a while for the same reason it died out in Israel, that people, Jews who came to the U.S., Yiddish-speaking Jews, their families didn't want to have Yiddish spoken. They wanted their kids to assimilate. But now we have these camps that I mentioned earlier, but and also other efforts to revive Yiddish. And one example I saw before this pandemic started was the production in New York of Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. Wonderful, Fiddler auf dem Dach. And it's all in Yiddish, but there's subtitles, or actually side titles, where you can see the translation of it. Wonderful production. And I don't speak Yiddish, but you know the songs, you know the plot, and so you know some of the words, so it's not hard to understand. I see Karen there, and I would love to, are you willing to say some of the words that you were hearing? And I know you invited some of your friends along too. Nice to see you, Karen.
Nice to see you, Cindy. You're doing a wonderful job. I'm proud of you. My kindergarten friend. Yeah, well, we were, as Cindy mentioned, we were talking about our early childhood's memories. And I was telling her that one of the first words that I learned that's Yiddish was kinahura, and I learned it from the neighbor Janie Ketchowitz, who lived across the street. And I don't know why that I still remember so vividly. That word seemed to be, first of all, very long and big, like I could hold it in my hands, and it was also, it felt very onomatopoetic, and your mouth had to work a little bit to say it. So I enjoyed it, and I think that in general I find a lot of Yiddish words to be fun to say. I don't know if they're onomatopoetic because I don't necessarily know what they mean, but there's just some sense of texture and depth to them that I enjoy a lot. And yeah, so that's what I can say. I mean, I could rattle off a few more words. Schmata is wonderful.
Schmata, that's a great example, yeah.
Trying to clean up
I
my
think this
thoughts,
gives us a
right?
good idea of, you know, and Karen, I think, you know, recognizes these as Yiddish words, as opposed to being assimilated into general English so much that people don't even recognize them as Jewish words. So you kind of say, oh, well, that's Yiddish, but what does it add? It adds humor, it adds, you know, to some situations, it adds a sense of not being as serious, you know, perhaps, and, but why should it? Why should, you know, shifting language? There is a theory in English, this has to do with my study of literature, called sound symbolism, where, you know, in English, we have a lot of, for example, GL words that have to do with glitter and gold and glamour and glisten, you know, and in part they have to do with word origins, but I think they take on a life of their own, so that, you know, words get invented along those lines that share the meaning because of the sound. And I think in Yiddish, that's a good example, because one word that my brother said he remembered from his young childhood is a wonderful, it stuck with me too, is shmagegi. And, you know, this shmagegi, you know, again, is it used today? Again, this is where kind of doing these searches makes it kind of fun, but it just means a fool. There are lots of shma words that have to do with being a fool, or, you know, or not such a good person. So, so that's kind of an interesting aspect of it. So now we might turn to some of the questions about why use Yiddish, and clearly it expresses some kind of a cultural identity with people, like Harry Samuel's example of being, you know, in a place where they had this shared language, and, you know, and then it opens people up when you have a shared language that you speak. And this is true for all dialects. It isn't just in Jewish English, and Black English would be another example. And a friend of mine investigated what he called Chinglish, or Chinese English, again, accented, but, you know, and Spanglish is another example. It establishes a connection with the people that you're listening to, so that when Sophie was saying goodbye to us 2 weeks ago, I noticed she didn't just say bye, see you later. She said Shabbat Shalom, even though it wasn't quite Shabbos yet. Starting Friday afternoon, anytime afternoon, I think it's okay to say Shabbat Shalom, or Good Shabbos. And Chag Sameach, because we had a holiday 2 weeks ago. So happy holiday, Chag Sameach. This was a greeting, and it was not, I don't think it was planned ahead of time. It was just, you know, what you say when you're saying goodbye to a group of people that you think will understand what you're saying. And even if they don't, there's no harm done. But what I particularly like about why use it is that sometimes no other word quite will do. And one example of this is when I was talking, I'm glad to see Harry Samuels back again, because he wrote a book called Beshert. And Beshert is a wonderful Yiddish word. Maybe, Harry, you could probably define it. I used some synonyms like karma and predestined, fated, something that's by fate, and also as a person, my Beshert would be my soulmate. My, you know, have I missed something there? And he gives examples of instances that people felt were beshert, some of them from Memphis, Tennessee. So I'm excited about that. And then I've also seen it on JDate. JDate is a Jewish dating site, and not that I've used it myself. Of course, you can go, but you can go research these things out. But I'm not putting it down. My cousin's son and his wife met on JDate, and so it was a way for Jewish people who want to have a serious relationship with another Jewish person, where you can find your beshert. And I think that was an interesting usage as well. So there are other words that are spreading into general English. Some of them, this got my attention. I was listening to another series. It takes place in post-World War II London. And most of it has nothing to do with being Jewish. Call the Midwife has to do with some midwives who are in a convent, but they're nurses in a convent who are getting sent out to different homes. But in one episode, they get sent to the home of some Jewish immigrants where the grandmother refuses to leave the house because of her experiences in during the war in Europe. So calling the midwife, and the one word that that seemed to depict her as being Jewish was meshugana, or crazy. So it struck me that if you're writing fiction and want to depict a character as being Jewish, what word would you use to say, this character is Jewish, but I want everybody who's non-Jewish in my audience to understand it as well? And that's another question I have for you. Do you, can you think of what's the most prototypical Jewish word? Maybe it's oy vey, maybe, but I'm not sure what it is. There's a book by Tova Mervis, who is from Memphis, called The Ladies Auxiliary, and she intersperses that with some Hebrew and Yiddish words and some foods and so on that would be typically Jewish, but also Southern. I liked it because it, and there used to be a grocery store in Memphis called the Piggly Wiggly. And and now this is a fictional book, but I'm sure it has a lot of truth. And there really was the Piggly Wiggly in Memphis. But she said, and this is about the Orthodox Jewish community in Memphis, Tennessee. You may not think that exists, but it does, and it did. It's a very large Orthodox Jewish community. Maybe most of you may know more about its current status than I do. But years ago, there was a Piggly Wiggly that the Orthodox would refuse to go to just because its name sounded treif. That is non-kosher. And I just love that line from it, that you wouldn't go to the Piggly Wiggly because even its name was treif. Another word that I think expresses a relationship that no English word covers is the relationship between your parents and your spouse's parents. And so these are in-laws to in-laws, and they're your machatanim. There's I found this on a recent Columbia Journalism Review Language Corner articles that says, perhaps it's time for English to adopt such a term. Well, because maybe in Jewish culture, we have more kind of occasions where those groups would meet each other. I know in my family we did, that my mother's parents and my father's parents and cousins and other relatives would have occasions to meet. My favorite example, I think, is when my mother, who was widowed when I was just 12 years old. I lost my father when I was 12. But shortly thereafter, a few years later, she threw what she called a nachas party, wonderful word, a party just to celebrate the joys of what was going on. My brother was graduating college. I was graduating high school. I had a cousin getting married. There were just so many good things. And bringing it together as a nachas party was a way of expressing that wonderful good time that you can have even when life has thrown you some curveballs. So, and a mitzvah. Now, the general public, I think, knows a lot about bar and bat mitzvah. They may say, but do they know what performing a mitzvah is? And I had an occasion to use this very early in the mornings on the beach that I've retired to in Florida. Some people get together for looking at the sunrise, and their dogs, which aren't usually allowed on the beach, we get down there and we visit. And this is a very mixed group of people, all religions. Some have deep faith. There are a couple of Jewish people, not too many, but it's not that big, but so we come to know each other, and our dogs are friendly, and it's a lovely group, and they love to share hugs. Unfortunately, this time we haven't been sharing as many hugs, but I know this woman goes every day, and at certain times of year, I live in a place where you see these huge turtles coming out to lay their eggs from the ocean and then returning to the ocean. And I know you sometimes have to get up very early, and you have to come off and be lucky enough to see one. I asked this woman to call me if she ever saw such a thing and I could come, because I could get there real fast. And she did the next day. And I told her she'd done a real mitzvah. And I didn't have any other word that I could think of that expressed how deeply grateful I was for her calling me. And of course I had to explain exactly what it was. And the other Jewish guy who was there that day said, oh yeah, you know, and he was agreeing that this was an opportunity for doing a mitzvah. I love that word too, of course. Now there's some words that aren't even Yiddish, but they're Jewish, I would say, especially used in certain contexts. So there's the Chicken Soup book series by Canfield and Hansen. But now when I looked it up today, there were at least 20 different Chicken Soup for the Soul type books. Chicken Soup for Teenagers, you know, things that will make you feel better. And I think we can all use a little chicken soup for the soul today. And I love that word because it's English, but it's Jewish too, and it's Jewish English. Sometimes chicken soup is called Jewish penicillin because it's, you know, whatever ails you, chicken soup will fix it. And then there are expressions like, what am I, chopped liver? And right, it's the syntax, the sentence structure of it, but also that specific instruction. Here I came up with there were a bunch of cartoons and posters and even a Sesame Street example, you know, where chopped liver, there's a mug you can buy, and there's a name badge you can buy called where you write chopped liver. So yeah, you're chopped liver. And of course, you know, that means something like, you know, well, I think, you know, just from the context, how important can I be? Something when you are happy, somebody will be, you know, when you'd like it to be a wish that comes true, you know, like this pandemic will stop next week, from your mouth to God's ears, or from your lips to God's ears would be a way of expressing that desire. Again, associated with expressions that from Jewish English, but used a lot in English today. And here's where we were talking earlier about, we express this family connection using the names that we talk, but also talking to our children. Like you gave the example of calling the child mamala, and these kinds of warm expressions. I have to admit, my dog here is sleeping next to me, but I taught her how to play Pachi Pachi Kichala and was looking up the words to it just to play with the dog. So it's, you know, you express this warmth. And and her name is Muffin, the puppy is Muffin, but I call her Muffala sometimes, my dear little Muffin. So it expresses family connections. Well, now we have English and other, not just Yiddish, but I've got to thinking about, in general, words used in the community because we're in a pandemic now. And I hear Wolf Blitzer saying on CNN, when they're listing some people who've passed away, they'll say rest in peace, but also say, and may his memory be a blessing. And that comes from that, you know, he's Jewish. I think he's sensitive to sharing. And now other people, I noticed on the news, have been more sensitive to sharing rest in peace, which is not so much a Jewish concept, I think. But then I don't want to speak for all Jews. We're all different, right? And or rest his soul. But the direct connection to the Hebrew, may his memory be a blessing. I also want to expand this maybe to thinking about, and maybe you'll think about, if this talk leaves anything with you, some other expressions that have come into existence, not Jewish ones, but just in general, of how the language itself is changing because of our pandemic. It's something that's been on my mind. So all of us are now familiar with the names of this virus that we never, in fact, we had to invent one for this one, right? COVID-19 didn't exist before this started, but coronavirus, or even the word pandemic, which was used in the past, became more familiar because of this. Terms like social distancing, and you'll notice that it becomes a verb to social distance yourself from somebody, herd immunity. And my granddaughter, Phyllis is there, thank you, came up with this example, maskne. You know what that is?
Put on your mask.
I think some of the college students in college environment know it more than outside of it. And so maskne is the acne that you get from wearing a mask all the time. So the blemish that you get from using it. So it's wonderful to kind of see words getting invented by this kind of shared social experience that we have. And because it's so widespread, there'll be words that our whole generation, multi-generations really, but everybody who's experienced this will remember. So this question of whether Jewish English is disappearing, I gave the example earlier of Fiddler Affendock. I watched 2 network things that you might be interested in. Again, I don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish very well. I know a few words, but they're all subtitled. There's a series called Unorthodox, which is about a woman, semi-autobiographical fictionalized series about a woman who leaves the Orthodox community in New York City. She goes off to Berlin to study music. But in the early episodes, it's mostly in Yiddish because that's what the community is speaking. And then, of course, she has multiple linguistic skills in speaking English, Yiddish, German, and other languages. And there's another series that takes place in Jerusalem, in the Orthodox community in Jerusalem, called Shtisel, about, which is in Hebrew with some Yiddish and English subtitles. There's an occasional English word, but it's mostly in Hebrew and in Yiddish. So we're seeing Yiddish spread, and there's a couple of things that we mentioned about Jewish English in Memphis. So since Memphis is sponsoring this, we talked about Harry Samuel's book, Tova Mervis's book. There was an area in Memphis it's been changing a lot, but it was settled by Jews, and it became the Jewish equivalent of the Lower East Side of New York, the Pinch, where Yiddish was spoken. And there was even a Yiddish school established, I think in the early 19th century, by the Workmen's Circle, which is primarily a Jewish socialist group that spoke a lot of Yiddish. This was mostly in the early 19th century. And Elvis lived in a Jewish part of town in his early years. And he was a Shabbos goy for the rabbi, and Shabbos goy is a non-Jewish person who is willing to turn on the lights for you because a religious Jew doesn't turn the lights on Sabbath, or turn on the stove, or whatever might do a little work, but is willing to on the Shabbos. And he was good friends with the rabbi, and later, when he learned that the rabbi was in his audience of a show that he was giving in California, he was said to have introduced this rabbi as being, "Here's my rabbi," which is an odd story about Elvis. So why do you use Jewish English, if you use it, or where have you heard it being used, or do you have any other comments or questions? So I'm hoping that we'll open up to anybody else who has a comment or a question or an example.
Yes,
I'll write them all down.
Dean, I see you raising your hand.
Me unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I can't, for some reason, I think I need to change the screen so I see all the who's there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm one of the friends of Karen's that she invited me to.
Fantastic. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Very glad to participate. It's really it was a lot of fun. I have a couple of things. First, I want to just tell you that really I'm third generation, and when you was talking about families that wanted to assimilate so much that they basically did not even attempt to keep the language. That is certainly the story of my family. My grandparents spoke it, but only when they wanted to speak to one another. And my parents didn't speak it at all, although my mother did buy the Joy of Yiddish book in life. So I rarely heard Yiddish words during my youth, except perhaps when my father was angry. And it came out at that point. I mean, I remember things like gay cock and yam and something about cock and chinik. I had no idea what that meant at the time. Those are the only words I really heard, except for maybe bubala, which was a favorite one of mine. So anyway, that's my experience. But one of the things I was interested in that I wonder whether you have explored or whether you think it's worthy of exploration is that I was wondering, because I'm a student, I love comedy, and there are so many, there are several non-Jewish comedians, such as like Robin Williams and George Carlin, who in their, in their acts used a lot of Yiddish words. And I'm just wondering if anybody ever studied the effect, the extent to which comedians have helped to spread Yiddish words generally in our language, in the English language.
That is a wonderful question and observation. I'm old enough to remember the Borscht Belt in New York, which was a set of hotels in the Catskills where there were many Jewish comedians performed and used a lot of Jewish. Even as a young girl, I got to see one or two acts of those comedians in the Borscht Belt. And I have a friend who, my grandfather, the rabbi, ran a summer camp in the Adirondacks for many years. It took different forms, but for a while it was a family camp with waiters that were often from New York or other places, often very smart people and almost always Jewish. So one of them I rediscovered only a couple of years ago. So when I was a little girl, he was a waiter there. More recently, he had a career as a psychiatrist in New York. And then he decided he wanted to go into comedy. And at the age of 80, he performs Jewish comedy in New York. What makes it Jewish is not just for Jews. It's at a comedy place that has lots of different comedians and not just Jewish ones. So it's interesting that this is a shared way of doing it. And he has a cousin of mine observed that that Jewish jokes, they could often follow along a joke until the punchline, which was in Yiddish. And so you had a whole series of words that were spoken in English, and you were waiting for the punchline as though you were going to understand it. And then they said, well, but I never understood the punchline because it was in Yiddish and sometimes off color. So it's maybe more okay to do it off color in Yiddish than in English. So I love the idea of thinking about Jewish comedy. I also was thinking as we were talking about the fact that I once gave a talk, my only time I gave a talk on a cruise ship about Jewish English. My experience on cruise ships was more during holidays. I taught bridge on cruise ships. So I was familiar with the Jewish, with the bridge playing culture, but I didn't know how it would be to give a talk on Jewish English or basically Yiddish borrowings. But it was so well attended and people gave great questions and they were from all over the world. So this one lady from South America said, in Argentina, we have some Jewish Spanish words, she said, and the example she gave was tangola. That is the sweet little Jewish tango that, so the ELE ending added to tango. And I looked up tangola just the other day because I was thinking about this subject, of course. And lo and behold, it talks a lot about the settlement of wartime settlement of Jews in South America and the influence of Yiddish on Spanish in South America. And it's not trivial. It's an important part of that discussion too. But it does add a sense of humor and a sense of, triviality perhaps to it as well.
We have time. We're a little over our time allotment.
I'm sorry.
We might have time for one more final comment from the crowd or question from the crowd.
I want to thank a cousin I saw earlier here. I don't know if she's still there. It's Gail. My cousin Gail Golden is, and she, are you there, Gail?
Yes, I'm still here.
She gave me this wonderful example of Yiddish sometimes being spoken on the set of a artistic production, an acting production. Gail, Jewish cousin, is best known most recently perhaps for performing the role of Mrs. Santa Claus in the Thanksgiving Day Parade. So,
And I am going to do it this year. My friend is going to drive me to the city. So
okay, well, so if you see Mrs. Claus waving at you, it's Gail. But I really wanted to hear more about Yiddish on the set of acting scene,
just nothing specific, just that it would be very common, you know, for people to use all the more common Yiddish expressions, and probably not even be aware of the fact that those were Yiddish words. Just think of them as New York words or show business words.
So, but that was interesting to me. So in addition to, say, having these bridge words like kibbutz that might be from Yiddish that people are not self-conscious, you have these sort of acting scene words that also have this Yiddish community.
I don't know if they specifically have acting words, but certainly they would use words and they would think, you know, even if they were originally from a part of the country where no Yiddish was spoken and, you know, that they would think of them as this is the way theater people talk, or this is the way we talk in Hollywood. Yeah.
So both in Hollywood and New York. So
yes.
So I don't know, it's just a final maybe thought to leave people with is that, you know, it's not just one thing, and it's this intersection of our identities, and whether that's being young, being old, being Jewish, being in New York, being talking to family, being part of Hillel, all of those kind of circumstances blend and intersect with all of our identities. So each of us has a way of speaking that's influenced by many, many factors. And this has been, I really have enjoyed this opportunity to look into this subject again, and to update some of the examples and to hear your comments. So thank you very much.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Professor Bernstein, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Like I did last time, I'd like to do a little shout out and plug for our next lecture, which is in 2 weeks. It's on Friday, October 30th from 12 to 1 p.m. Central Time. It's featuring Professor Marian Levy from the U of M School of Public Health, all about the public health COVID response. So that'll be a very interesting, a totally different topic, but just another way to celebrate the amazing academic talent we have here in Memphis. So that is open for anyone to join. I put the link to the webpage with more information in the chat box if you would like to find out more and find the registration links. And otherwise, thank you all for joining. And as I said last time too, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.